In the wide, wind-swept plains of the northern frontier, the drums of war grow louder. The United States Army pushes westward, hungry for land and dominance, and the Lakota find themselves standing on the brink of war. In the face of this mounting pressure, one man steps forward, not for glory, but for the survival of his people. Gall, the hardened Lakota warrior, rises as a symbol of defiance. His name carries weight, spoken in awe among allies and in fear by his enemies. But as his legend grows beneath the western sky, so too does the presence of an old rival. In the shadows, a familiar hatred waits, watching, remembering, and ready to strike. This is Chronicles of the Old West. Season 1, Episode 2, Gall, Lakota War Chief.
Gall was not born to peace. From his earliest days, he knew the struggle of his people. He ran with the hunters, tracking the buffalo across the endless sea of grass. He listened to the elders tell stories of the old days before the white man came in numbers too great to count. He learned from the war chiefs, their words tempered like steel in the fire of conflict. And he listened to the warriors, too, men who'd seen blood and fire and had shaped their words like weapons. By the time Gall could carry a lance, he was already a name men spoke with respect or fear. He was quick, smart, and fierce. He didn't bluff, and he didn't back down. It was the year the Wasatch Call, 1862, when Gall first heard of the war among the Dakota to the east, kindred of the Lakota. The stories came with those who had fled, men, women, and children, who had seen their homes burned, their people killed, their world shattered. The Dakota had risen against the white settlers, had taken their revenge for broken promises, stolen land, and empty bellies. But the war had ended in blood and despair. 38 warriors hung from the gallows in a single day, and those who survived were hunted like wolves. Gall listened and said little. The Wasatch did not rest, did not allow peace. Like hungry wolves, they came, their scent thick on the wind. General Sibley's soldiers hunted them across the plains, and wherever they went, war followed. At Dead Buffalo Lake, at Stony Lake, Gall stood with the great leader, Sitting Bull. The Wasatch fought as coyotes do, circling, striking from afar, their fire sticks tearing flesh before a man could see his enemy's face. The Lakota and Dakota fought bravely, but the Wasatch were like a river in flood, their numbers too great. So, the people turned their ponies north, crossing the Missouri, leaving the smoke of battle trailing in their wake. But they weren't beaten. Not yet. When the next summer came, the bands gathered at Knife River, Hunkpapa, Minneconjou, Dakota, drawn together by sorrow, by anger, by the need to strike back. Gall rode with them to Killdeer Mountain. There, the soldiers came, more than before, their blue coats stretching across the land like a moving stream. The fight was brutal and short. Gall's rifle cracked like thunder, his tomahawk clean and fast. The warriors hit hard, but the enemy had numbers and cannon. Again, the people were forced to pull back, their lodges turned to ash, their food trampled under the boots of the long knives. So they went to the Badlands, taking their grief with them, finding shelter in the broken earth. At Whitestone Hill, they stood again. Gall was there, his rifle across his lap, calm as stone. The people ran for the river, chased by gunfire and fear. The warriors turned to fight, Gall among them. They didn't fight for glory. They fought so their wives and children could live. Gall did not weep, though sorrow sat heavy in his chest. When the battle ended, the land was scarred, and the people had lost much. The soldiers came after that like an endless rain. They built their forts along the Missouri, their wagons rolling like a river of wood and iron across the land. They took what was not theirs, and while the Lakota stood against them, they could not overcome their endless numbers. Gall watched as his people struggled against the tide. Some among the Lakota talked of peace, of handshakes and promises written on paper. Gall didn't. He remembered what peace had meant for the Dakota. Promises broken, men hung, women starved, children lost. He had no use for treaties. He didn't need a piece of paper to tell him who he was or where he belonged. It was the moon when the plums are scarlet in the year 1864, when Gall rode with Sitting Bull in search of buffalo. The people needed meat. Hunger doesn't wait, not even in war. They rode the land between the Grand and the Little Missouri, watching the ridges, reading the wind. That's when they saw the wagons. They moved slow, heavy with everything the settlers owned: iron pots, rocking chairs, rifles. The people inside them looked tired but wary, the kind of people who knew enough to keep their guns close. Gall and Sitting Bull lay quiet in the grass. They watched. They waited. The Wasatchu looked but didn't see. They were out of place, walking a land that didn't belong to them, and not even knowing it. They didn't know the eyes watching from the ridges. They didn't feel the tension in the wind. Then the moment came, as Gall hoped it would. The great wooden box tipped in a rut and gave way. It tipped slow at first, then crashed down with a sound like a tree splitting in a storm. Men shouted, clambering after it, grabbing for anything that might be saved. Gall felt it then, the call of the hawk inside him, fierce and clear. Beneath him, the ground trembled with the coming of hooves. He let out a cry, high and sharp, and his warriors answered. They came fast, riding low, a wall of thunder rolling out of the prairie. The white men tried to resist, but they did not understand the way of the Lakota. They didn't fight with the land beneath them or with the horse as a part of their own flesh. They stood and fired, but they didn't move like the wind. They didn't know how death could ride with a man, silent and certain. Arrows whistled, bullets cracked, dust boiled up, thick enough to choke the sun. Inside it, men fought the way they always had, close and sudden, not with fancy words, but with blood and grit. Sitting Bull rode beside him, his rifle speaking with the power of thunder. Then, a cry, sharp as a broken blade. Gall turned and saw his brother stumble, saw him fall hard to the earth. For a second, Gall's chest burned like fire. He saw the wound, bad, but not the kind that kills. Sitting Bull was already dragging himself to his feet, teeth clenched, reaching for his horse like a man who'd done this before, because he had. Gall turned his horse and raised his voice again. His men answered, their cries echoing across the hills. They weren't done. Sitting Bull swung back up, blood on his leg, grit in his eyes, but the fight still in him. He rode on, and the Lakota hit the Wasatchu like a hard wind out of the west. The settlers faltered, their line cracked, panic took hold, and they ran, stumbling, shouting, dropping their rifles as they tried to get clear. The Lakota drove them, pushed them hard, chased them like wolves chase wounded elk. When it was over and the dust began to settle, 8 white men lay still on the prairie, silent, still. Gall didn't smile. He didn't raise his arms in triumph. This wasn't victory. This was a warning. Deep down, he knew what was coming. The soldiers would be back. There'd be more of them next time. There'd always be more. The forts kept rising, one after another. Fort Rice, Fort Union, Fort Berthold. Each one was a stake driven into the heart of the plains, and every man who rode those trails knew what it meant. Some of the Lakota began to waver. Men like Bear's Rib talked of peace. Running Antelope spoke of finding a way to live beside the soldiers, but Gall had been too close to the fire to be fooled by its warmth. He'd seen the Dakota pushed from their lands, their lodges burned, their treaties broken like dry twigs under a boot. He'd seen the Wasichu smile with one hand outstretched while the other gripped a knife. Gall knew what lay beneath their talk of peace. It was the slow, steady grind of conquest. More soldiers came, veterans from the war back east, men who had fought in fields of mud and blood, brother against brother, until they couldn't tell one cause from another. When that war ended, they turned west, looking for something else to kill. They came in long columns, boots thudding in rhythm, their eyes empty from having seen too much. They'd slept in snow and marched through fire. Now they wore the blue coats of the U.S. Army, and they had orders: break the people of the plains, claim the land, and don't look back. General Sully was one of them. A hard man, carved from the same stone as the country he marched through. He'd fought the Dakota before, and he'd crushed them beneath the heel of his army. Now, he aimed to do the same to the Lakota. He brought wagons stacked with shot and shell, cannons that roared like thunderheads, and a line of men who didn't blink at killing. The soldiers moved like spring floodwaters, slow at first, then rising and spreading across the land. They left scars wherever they passed: timber forts, deep ruts cut by wagon wheels, roads that split the earth like old wounds. They strung wires through the sky to carry words faster than any pony could run. It was a new world they were building, and they meant to shape it with steel and fire. Gall and Sitting Bull rode together, quiet on their mounts, watching the sun fall over the river. The Lakota camp stretched for miles, teepees scattered along the banks, smoke rising into the twilight, children running between the lodges. Meat sizzled on the fires, and the people talked in low voices, passing news and stories. But under it all was something else, a stillness, a tension, like the air before a storm. They all felt it, even the children. Something was coming, and it wouldn't be stopped with words. They were riding from camp to camp, dust rising behind their ponies, their voices carrying warnings to every fire they passed. Chiefs gathered where they could. Old men sat in tight circles, and the people listened. They spoke of the Wasichu, their silver-tongued promises, their treaties that vanished like smoke on the wind. Gall and Sitting Bull rode hard to spread the truth. There was danger in believing the white man's word, and they meant to say it plain. Word had come down the line that some Lakota had ridden into Fort Rice, tired of fighting, hungry for rest. They believed the soldiers might offer peace, but Gall had seen the white man's peace. He'd seen what it cost the Dakota, Lands lost, children gone, old men left to die under foreign flags. So, the two men turned their mounts toward Fort Rice, riding fast, hoping to stop what could not be undone. They were still a ways off when they heard it, cannon fire splitting the air like a tree cracked by lightning. The sound rolled across the plains, deep and sharp, echoing off the hills. To the soldiers, it was a salute, a ceremony to mark the arrival of some officer whose name would be forgotten by winter. But to Lakota ears, it was something darker. That thunder spoke of death. It spoke of burning lodges and blood in the snow. It spoke of children's cries, swallowed by the roar of flames, of women running through the smoke with nothing left to save. Gall heard it and felt it like a blow to the chest. The people with them panicked. Some turned their horses and ran. Others clutched their children tight, their voices cracking in fear. They knew what the Wasatchu's kindness meant. They'd seen it before. A gun fired in celebration could just as quick be fired in war. A hand extended in peace could hide a rope or a chain. Gall didn't move. He stayed beside Sitting Bull, his eyes fixed on the horizon, on that cursed fort, rising out of the earth like a wound that wouldn't heal. This was the truth, and it was laid out before them in smoke and thunder. The Wasatchu came smiling, but their smiles came with guns, and their words were followed by steel. As the camp scattered, as fear rippled through the people like a prairie fire, Gall and Sitting Bull sat their horses and didn't flinch. They didn't need to speak. They both knew. There would be no peace, not while the white man built his forts and claimed the rivers, not while the land was taken inch by inch, the old ways shoved aside like driftwood on a flood. They turned their horses toward the wind, and they rode. What needed to be done would be done, and it would be remembered. They rode lean and hard, with the wind at their backs and the weight of old sorrows driving them forward. The call went out across the plains, and the warriors came, quiet at first, then in growing numbers, until 300 strong rode beneath the stars. Their ponies were sure-footed, their weapons sharp, and their hearts steady. Sitting Bull led them, war paint drying on his skin, his eyes sharp as a knife, honed on stone. Gall rode at his side, grim and silent, carrying the fire of memory like a coal beneath his ribs. They rode not for glory, but to remind the Wasatchu that the Lakota had not been broken. Ahead stood Fort Rice, rising out of the prairie like a wound in the earth, high palisades of timber bristling like the ribs of some dead thing. Inside, the soldiers waited, their rifles close, their cannons silent for now. Men trained in war, hardened in battles far to the east, now turned west to finish what they had started. But the Lakota knew war too. They had learned it from their fathers, from bitter winters and burned lodges, from skirmishes fought not for land or pride, but for survival. The warriors came fast and low, their cries cutting through the night like the scream of a hunting hawk. They did not strike the walls or face the guns head on. They rode for the horses, because a soldier on foot was half a man, and a cavalry without horses was no cavalry at all. Gall led the charge. His rifle was raised high, his pony driving forward like it knew the stakes. He aimed not to die, but to be remembered. His voice rose above the thunder of hooves, calling others to his side. The corral came into view, the smell of sweat and hay thick in the air. Then came the noise, rifles cracking, cannon fire booming like thunder, rolling across the plains. The earth shook, the night lit up with gunfire. Warriors shouted, horses screamed. A young man beside Gall pitched forward, a hole torn clean through him. Gall did not pause. He cut the lines and turned a freed mount toward the prairie, his jaw clenched, eyes burning. The soldiers were everywhere now, pouring from the fort like hornets from a broken nest. Still, the Lakota fought. Through smoke and lead, they moved with purpose. Arrows flew, rifles barked in reply. But the storm was too great. The white men's bullets fell like sleet in a spring flood, cold, sudden, and without mercy. 2 horses made it out. Just 2. Not enough. Not near what they came for. One by one, the warriors wheeled away, riding back into the dark. They had bled and risked for little, but they had sent a message. They were still here, and they would not go quietly. By the time the sun had climbed high, Sitting Bull had called his warriors off. The battle hadn't been won. The Wasichu still stood behind their walls, rifles ready, cannons still hungry for fire. 1 soldier was dead, 4 more were wounded. But the Lakota had lost more than that. Each warrior who fell left a mark, a name carved into the memory of the people, a name to be sung of in the stories when the elders spoke of those who'd crossed into the spirit world. Gall rode alongside Sitting Bull, their hearts burning with frustration. They had hoped for more. They'd wanted to break the Wasichu, to leave a scar that would last. But that day hadn't given them what they sought. Not yet. Sitting Bull had hoped for victory, but he knew that sometimes victory wasn't about bodies falling or the ground soaked with blood. Sometimes victory was in the message, in the fear that took root in the hearts of the Wasichu. That night, the soldiers would remember. They would remember that the Lakota weren't gone. They were still there, watching, waiting, ready to fight. The Battle of Fort Rice brought no glory, but it tore any illusion of peace wide open. To the Lakota, it was clear the Wasichu had given up any pretense of harmony. And with that realization, Sitting Bull, Gall, and their people moved through the rough badlands of the Little Missouri, headed toward the Powder River country. And there, unexpectedly, they ran into more soldiers. Led by Colonel Nelson Cole and Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Walker, the soldiers moved like men trapped in a never-ending fight. Their spirits were worn, their eyes hollow from days of struggle. They had crossed the plains after the Lakota, but the land was pushing them back. The soil didn't want them. It remembered the blood that had soaked into it and gave nothing in return. Supplies were low, and hunger gnawed at them. Their horses, once strong and proud, now staggered beneath the weight of the journey. Doubt began to creep in, slow but steady, like a shadow at dusk. Then the sky turned cruel. The wind screamed through the valleys, cold, sharp, unforgiving. A storm rolled in, bringing ice-laced winds that cut at the soldiers like the claws of a beast. The cold showed no mercy. They tried to fight it off, huddled close to the fires, but the wind snatched the flames away. By morning, mules lay dead in the snow, silent, frozen, unmoving. The soldiers stared, stunned, as the life drained from their supplies. Their wagons, buried beneath the weight of the storm, were no good. The supply line was broken. They were stranded, surrounded by an unforgiving land, far from safety. That was when Gall and his warriors struck. The soldiers had pushed too far, their presence no longer just a distant threat, but a violation. Gall wasn't alone. He rode with a war party of young men, hungry for the fight, burning with fire. They followed Gall because they believed, like him, that this was their moment. Gall led them to a high point on the ridge, his eyes scanning the soldiers below. The sight of them, huddled in the snow, weak and vulnerable, sparked something in his chest. This wasn't the army that had crossed the plains with arrogance. The elements had stripped them of their pride, and now their strength was gone. Gall would make sure they knew the Lakota were not to be taken lightly. The Wasatchu weren't invincible. They could bleed just like anyone else. From both sides of the valley, the Lakota came. Ghosts in the mist, their figures dimmed by the snow, but their presence undeniable. Gall led them with the precision of a wolf on the hunt, eyes fierce, heart steady. His warriors followed close behind, their ponies sure on the icy ground, their bodies tuned to the land. They rode fast, their arrows and bullets finding their targets with deadly accuracy. The soldiers fired back, panic in their voices, but the Lakota were already among them. The battle was chaos, shouts, gunfire, the clash of men and horses. But Gall moved through it with the calm of a man who knew his purpose. His rifle spoke and his war club swung, striking like a snake in the grass. Sitting Bull was beside him, his presence a rock for the people. But it wasn't Sitting Bull's hand that turned the tide. It was the young warriors, the ones who burned with the fire of their ancestors, the ones who believed in the fight. Their bravery was unyielding, and it was their push that broke the Wasatchu lines. The soldiers, once so sure of their might, began to falter. The storm had already battered them, and now the Lakota were closing in. They had thought themselves invincible, but the Lakota reminded them that pride alone didn't win battles. By the time the battle ended, the soldiers were retreating, broken in spirit, bodies weak, their pride shattered. They left behind their dead and wounded, unable to carry them any farther. Gall knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't about victory. It was about survival, about sending a message. Every fight was just one piece of the larger war. He sent messengers to warn Red Cloud of the Oglalas and Little Wolf of the Northern Cheyennes that the Wasatchu were coming. Gall and Sitting Bull knew the land wouldn't be won through battle alone. But for now, the Lakota had breathing room. They could hunt again. They could feel the earth beneath their feet, the wind in their hair. For a time, the plains were theirs again. Gall fought for moments like this, the chance to live as their grandfathers had, to keep the buffalo in the hills and the fire in their hearts. Because what was a man, if not for his people? And what was a people, if not for the land that gave them life? The time of the buffalo was fading. The time of war, though, was far from over. With the retreat of the Coal Walker Column up the Powder River, Gall and his people found themselves free once again to trade with the white merchants and even with their old rivals, the Arikara. There was peace for now. The promise of food and supplies was enough to bridge old enmities, and the Lakota, hardened by hunger and winter, saw no reason to keep their distance. Peace, for a time, was a currency worth its weight. South of Fort Berthold, the Lakota raised their lodges among the willows, their thoughts on the trade to come. Their spirits, wearied by the hardships of winter, hoped only for the warmth of fire and the exchange of goods to ease the coming cold. The hope was a simple one, grounded in the earth and the way of life that had sustained them. But beneath the surface, darker currents stirred. In the distance, a man watched. His heart was black with a hatred that had festered for years. Bloody Knife, once a boy of the Lakota, had become a man among the Arikara. The time he spent with the Lakota had shaped him, leaving marks that would never fade. He had been mocked for his mixed blood, ridiculed by those he had once called brothers. Gall had led the taunts, his laughter ringing out as the other boys joined in. To them, a half-blood had no place in the heart of the tribe. It was a matter of pride, of honor. The sting of those days lingered, deep and bitter. Bloody Knife carried his scars like a brand, a constant reminder of the cruelty he had endured. But there was more than mockery that fueled his hatred. The true wound, the one that had cut deepest, was the loss of his brothers at Gall's hands. Gall's war party had crossed paths with the Arikara during one of their raids. It was a skirmish like many others, tribe against tribe, survival on the line. Bloody Knife's brothers had fought beside their people that day, stood firm against Gall's warriors. But Gall was a leader of unmatched skill, a force of nature. His warriors had struck fast and hard, cutting through the Arikara ranks with the precision of a deadly storm. Bloody Knife's brothers had fallen, their scalps taken, their bodies left for the crows. That memory gnawed at him still, the hunger for vengeance growing with every passing year. Now, with malice burning in his heart, Bloody Knife went to the soldiers at Fort Berthold. He whispered poison in their ears, telling them Gall was a killer, a threat to the fort, a war chief whose bloodlust knew no bounds. The captain, driven by fear and arrogance, listened, as soldiers often did when their pride was at stake. He ordered his men into the night, bayonets gleaming in the cold light of the moon. Bloody Knife led them, his heart quickening with the promise of revenge. Gall had no inkling of the storm about to break over him. He sat in his lodge, lost in thoughts of the trade to come. The fire burned low, and the warmth of the flames felt far off, as his mind wandered, drifting through the fragile peace they had found. He had let his guard down, and peace, like all things, was fragile. When Gall stepped outside, the world was quiet, too quiet. The stillness held a tension in the air, as though the land itself was waiting. He scanned the camp, taking in the flicker of starlight, the dark line of trees in the distance. And then he saw them, soldiers, their faces hard as stone, their eyes empty of feeling, and among them, the eyes of Bloody Knife burned with the triumph of a long-awaited moment. Gall's instincts screamed a warning, but it was too late. His heart thundered in his chest, but his body was slow to react. The soldiers moved like wolves in the dark, bayonets flashing cold in the moonlight. The first blade struck deep, followed by another, then another. Iron teeth tearing into his flesh, drinking his blood. Pain exploded through him, but Gall did not scream. He would not give them the satisfaction. He staggered, his vision blurring, the world spinning as the earth beneath him seemed to rise up and claim him. The snow, once pure and white, ran red, steaming in the cold air. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one harder to draw as the dark closed in. The soldiers stood over him, their faces unreadable. One glanced down, then turned away. Another spat into the snow. To them, Gall was just another fallen chief, a war leader put down, his blood spilled into the frozen earth. But hatred is never satisfied. Bloody Knife stood over Gall's broken body, his breath ragged, his hands trembling, not with fear, but with the fire of long-awaited vengeance. The years of mockery, the sting of Gall's laughter, all of it burned within him. A hunger that could never be quenched. His fingers tightened around the barrel of his shotgun, the muzzle lowering until it hovered just inches above Gall's skull. This was the moment he would claim back everything that had been taken from him. The scorn, the loss, the years of waiting. He could taste victory, could feel it, settling in his chest like a cold weight. His lips twisted into a snarl as the gun pressed against Gall's skin. But before he could pull the trigger, a soldier's hand shot out, knocking the barrel aside just as the weapon roared. The shot echoed through the frozen night, but it did not strike its intended mark. Instead, the blast buried itself in the earth, sending a spray of dirt and ice into the air. A heavy silence settled over the scene. Bloody Knife turned, his eyes filled with rage, but the soldier who had intervened stood firm, their gazes locked, one full of hatred, the other cold and unyielding. Harsh words were exchanged, clipped and tense, but the soldier's rank held sway. He wasn't about to let the Lakota be stirred into violence. This was to be done quietly, and Bloody Knife had already drawn too much attention. Bloody Knife's jaw clenched, his fingers still itching to finish what he had started. But the moment had passed. With one last glare, he turned on his heel and walked away, his heart burning with frustration. The soldiers followed, believing their duty done. The snow settled, and the stillness returned. Gall lay where they had left him, his breath thin, his body broken, blood seeping into the cold earth, waiting for death to claim him.
And that wraps up this episode of Chronicles of the Old West. This podcast is a dramatized retelling based on real historical events, people, and places. While our narrator, Stabs Twice, is a fictional character, every effort has been made to remain true to the spirit and facts of history. Certain liberties have been taken with pacing and dramatic structure for storytelling purposes. The core events, figures, and settings are drawn from documented accounts and research. Next time on Chronicles of the Old West, Gall lies broken after a brutal ambush, his blood soaking the snow, his strength fading. But the threat has not passed. As settlers and soldiers close in, the question remains, can Gall recover in time to lead his people once more? Or will the rising tide of conquest wash away all that he holds dear? If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps us bring more stories to life. Thanks for riding with us. We'll see you next time on Chronicles of the Old West.